Hello and welcome to my channel and to my living room, where I just realized I have one of my daughter's teddy bears sitting with me, which is good company. So my name is Lorraine and I am the founder of a website called Viva50.com and a Facebook group called Your Best Age. Aside from being the founder of this online magazine and a writer, journalist, yogini, mom, daughter, wife, and master of all trades. Master of all trades. I'm not going to say jack of all trades. I mainly started my career as a writer, and I was recently speaking at a writing conference, and people were very interested in finding out how I published my first book, which is going to be the subject of today's video, which actually doesn't really matter whether you're 15, 20, 30, or 80 and you want to publish your first book. I'm not going to give you how to like step by step of how you should publish your first book, but I'm going to tell you the story of how I did it, and maybe that will spark some imagination in you and see how, if I was able to do it in 1993 when the internet wasn't even a thing. And you have a nonfiction or a memoir, which is what my book was, and I will show you in a minute. Maybe you can do it now. So the story is that I was born into a family of writers. My grandfather was a writer. He passed years ago. And my dad is also a writer, but he's more of a wordsmith. He's a lexicographer. He compiles dictionaries. He's more of an academic, and I'm more of a free spirit. My dad never wanted me to be a writer. He wanted me to be a marine biologist, and I did not do that. I just knew that I wanted to make a living with words and communicate. I wasn't really sure of how I should channel that energy or how to do that. Unfortunately, I dropped out of college when I was young because I had an eating disorder, which ties into my story as well. And by the way, I posted today on my site, Viva50.com, my 20-year struggle with bulimia and how I overcame it. So I spent my teens as a very moody, depressed, and conflicted child who grew up without her mom. I'm not saying that is the main reason why I had the depression and mental issues, but it did. Melancholy is how I remember my teens, part of my childhood, and goodness, and part of my adulthood as well. So depression, anxiety, and at 17, I just went into a full-blown eating disorder, which was really, really hard for me to deal with, and I was ashamed, embarrassed, and you name it. That was my big secret that even my family didn't know the full story of, and I kind of battled it on my own, and it was really hard to do back then because I was living in a time where there was no internet. I couldn't Google what's wrong with me. I knew that I was out of control, that I was sad, that I was different from other people I knew. But one thing that kept me going and saved my sanity somewhat was writing in my personal diary. And I would write by hand, and I would write, goodness, all the struggles I went through and my most embarrassing and out of control moments. And I kept that diary for years. So fast forward to my 20s, and in an effort to control my eating disorder, which I didn't control it through that at all, but I became a fitness instructor. As I said, I dropped out of college. I wanted to be a psychologist, of course, to figure myself out. Wasn't able to do it. And then from Spain, which is where I was living, I came to the United States to become certified to be a fitness instructor, and I did that, and then went back to Spain and started doing that, as well as falling into translating and adapting American sitcoms in English into Spanish for the Spanish market. And I loved that I was able to work with words. I was adapting those screenplays, and I got to to watch them, because in Spain we didn't have access to those series. So for me, that was, it was great to be able to do that. And so being bilingual, I did a lot of work adapting, translating, and interpreting. But still, there's always in my mind all those years, and still battling my eating disorder, I want to be a writer, and I want to be a writer, and I want to be a writer, and I don't know what to write. So I want to be a novelist, because I think that only novelists are real writers, that anything else is just not writing. So life keeps on happening, and relationships come and go. I continue battling my eating disorder, and suddenly I realize that I'm 29. And at 29, I tell myself, oh goodness, it was so hard. It was just like this big feeling inside me that was, I want to do something big for me, like something that I will feel that I can just die tomorrow. Excuse me, that is my dog barking. But I just wanted to do something very important for me before I turned 30. And that was writing and publishing a book. I tried to start a fiction book, but then I realized that there was one story, and this is, I tell this to writers everywhere when I have the chance. We all have a story. We all have a story that is begging to be told. And sometimes that is not the story we were prepared to tell, but it's a story that needs to come out before you can do anything else. So I decided, okay, I'm going to write about my struggle with my eating disorder. And all those years of keeping diaries actually helped me a lot, because I had my story from a very young age, my parents' divorce, my father's remarriage, everything I went through when I was a kid, the depressions and therapy, everything was in my notes. So by then I already had a computer. As I said, the internet was not a thing, and this has to do with my story, the internet not being around. But I already had a computer, and that's where I wrote my book. I sat down, and for a month, not longer than that really, because I had, as I said, all my notes of years, I sat down and I hammered out those pages feverishly. And while I was doing that, I made a mock cover of my book, which was, as I said, it was kind of like a memoir. Well, it was a memoir. And I had the title in my head already. It was, I Feel Fat, Me Siento Gorda. And I mean, I'm a little appalled because, of course, the book is so old that the cover is so old-fashioned. Look at that hair. Goodness. And I did not smile. Can you imagine? Back then, I wasn't confident yet, and I did not smile in pictures. And now, if you follow me on Instagram, Lorraine Ladish, you'll see that I can smile, and I smile big. But back then, unfortunately, I still wasn't there, even though I was into writing and publishing my book. But so I made a mock cover. I was living in Spain. The book was written in Spanish because, that's where I was living. And so the book was done. I did not, this is where I wasn't so great about what I did, because it was my first book. Now, 18 books later, I edit them, I read and reread, and etc. But having done it the way I did it was very raw, so that there's that. But again, it was my first book. So I finished the book, and I tell my dad, who didn't want me to be a writer, I finished the book and I'm going to try and publish it. And he was like, oh, good luck, because it's really hard. It doesn't matter if you're in Timbuktu or in the States or in Spain. The publishing world is pretty similar everywhere. And I had no contacts in the publishing world. I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know about having an agent or not having an agent or what. But so what I did is that I went, and this was of course before this existed, but anyway, more about the book later. So I went to a local bookstore and I looked at, now you could do that on Amazon or on the internet, but back then I just went to the bookstore and I went to the area of the bookstore where self-help books, there were no books on eating disorders in Spain back then, but spirituality and self-help and all that. And I wrote down in a little notebook the addresses and the fax numbers and the phone numbers of all the publishing houses that were publishing that type of book. So then I got home and I started writing query letters, and back then a fax was like the most innovative thing that you could use to contact somebody. So instead of writing regular letters, which is what everybody did then, like a letter that you put in an envelope and put your stamp on and put it in the mail. I'm sorry, because my dog really decided that today was the day he's going to bark, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I wrote these query letters, and it was basically back then Lady Diana of Wales, she had come out that she had bulimia. Jane Fonda came forward as well and said that she had bulimia. So in Spain they were starting to know a little bit what eating disorders were, but it wasn't a big deal. So I wrote to these publishing houses and explained to them that I had and actually still had an eating disorder, just like these two women that they might know about. And at the same time, though, I don't know, I mean, I was 29 and I guess I didn't know you couldn't do this, so I did it. I also found the fax numbers of TV programs in Spain on local and especially national TV, where I would tell them that I had written this memoir, and I wrote an excerpt. I included an excerpt of my book and explained what it was about, my struggle with my eating disorder, and that it was being considered by publishers, which was not untrue, because the publishers, I had also approached publishers. So when they started inviting me to tell my story on TV in Spain, and it was a ton of programs, I have all the videos on beta and VHS, and which I cannot watch, but I hope, well, I'm keeping them for my kids one day. And what I did was, when I knew that I was going to be on TV or the radio or wherever they were inviting me, I would fax the publishers who were considering my book, and I would say, by the way, I am going to be on XYZ program at whatever time. And the publishers would watch, and the ones that didn't want to even consider the book actually, after seeing me on TV, maybe read the manuscript. One other thing I did was that I also approached publications, and I told them, but newspapers, national newspapers, local newspapers, and I told them that I wanted to write about my story for them. And El Mundo, one of the national newspapers in Spain, said to me, well, actually they called me and they said, we got your fax. We don't want to run your story. We want to interview you. And the editor asked me, is it true that your book is going to be published? And I said, well, it's being considered. And he said, well, let's see if we can give you that little push. And that little push was that I was in the centerfold of a national newspaper, me with a picture of me holding my manuscript. I also wasn't smiling, just like in this picture. But anyway, that was a big deal. So within a month, I had 5 offers from publishers, some small, some big, 2 big ones in Spain, that wanted to publish my book. And it was funny because there was I couldn't believe it, but I could, because I had seen this. I had visualized it. I had made that mock cover. I had written the book. I had done crazy things to make it get published. And having all this to choose from was a little scary and at the same time exciting. So I will never know if I went with the best publisher, because that's another story for another day. The publishing world, what it's like here in the States and Spain and Timbuktu. There's a whole world there that is difficult to navigate. And but anyway, I signed up with one of them, and even when I had signed with them, I still received, because I had been blanket querying all these publishers, I still got more offers to publish the book, but I already had a publisher. And they wanted to rush the publication because they wanted to take advantage of the momentum I had gained on TV, radio, and publications and newspapers. And that's why my face was on the cover with my crazy hair and my very sad face. But and anyway, so in 3 months, which is very unusual. Usually a book takes at least a year to be published from the moment that you sign it or turn the manuscript in. After that, I did not write the books first. Nonfiction, usually you query with a proposal, but that came later. The first one was I wrote it, and that's how it went. So this was actually, so it's 1993, it's 24 years later, and it's still the book that sold the most of all my books in Spanish. And I don't have the Czech edition, but it also came out in Czech. And later on, there was a smaller paperback with a little bit of a smile, but still not that big. And then a different edition came out, which I can't find because I've moved so many times that I don't know where all my stuff is. But so that is the story of how my first book was published. And that could very well have happened in the States or anywhere else. And when people tell me that it's really difficult, it is difficult. My husband is a novelist. I know exactly how that goes. I also wrote 2 novels amongst all my books that I realized I could connect with people, and people responded. Back then I had a P.O. box. There was no email or anything, so I opened a P.O. box in case readers wanted to reach me. And to my surprise, when I went the first time to open the post office box, a ton of letters tumbled out, so I had to go with a sack, and I answered them all one by one. That is also another story. And well, what I would say nowadays is, well, now I have another book, my most recent book, which is also has its own story. It's called Tu Mejor Edad, Your Best Age, and it's published in the United States by HarperCollins. And the story of this book is very different, which I think I will tell it too, because God, when you're writing, you feel so lonely. You don't know what you're doing, and I understand budding writers of whatever age that need to know that it's actually possible to publish. I self-published one book that you can find on Amazon called Reach, From Single Mom on Welfare to Digital Entrepreneur. And the reason, that's the only book I've ever self-published out of the 18 or 19 that I published. And I think the reason why I'm not sure if it's 18 or 19 is because I don't usually count the self-published book. And the reason why I self-published just that one is because publishers want a certain length. They want the book, especially now in the States, where I'm starting to understand how it works here, they want the book to fit a certain shelf. It needs to have a certain number of words. It has to, you have to a little bit modify the book to fit what the publisher wants, whereas in other countries, your art is more accepted by the publisher and respected, which has its good side and its bad side as well. But so the reason for me self-publishing Reach, From Single Mom on Welfare to Digital Entrepreneur, was because I wanted the opportunity to make a short book. Because, you know, when you sign a contract and they tell you it has to have 60,000 words, and in English usually 80,000 words, that means that if your idea is very lean, you're going to have to flesh that out. And that doesn't always mean that you're going to put more ideas in there. It's just like you're looking at the idea from more angles. And I didn't want to do that with Reach. I just wanted it to be the bare bones, the story to show other women of whatever age that if I, in midlife, had been able to take my writing career from paper to digital and reinvent myself in a really tough economy, having lost everything at 45, marriage, work, source of income, savings, you name it, other people could as well. But the fact of the matter is that if you really, really want to publish a book with a publisher, goodness, if looking back on my story, and the reason why I tell it is, if I was able to do that without the internet, imagine what you can do with the internet, with Twitter, with Writer's Market online, where you can find out all the agents. I didn't even have an agent. And you can, goodness, there's a wealth of information and of resources for writers nowadays. And back then, when I started publishing, there was nothing. So another thing that I learned in retrospect from my own daring to do that was that if I had gone the traditional way, if I had not, excuse me, the dog again, if I had not dared to push beyond my comfort zone and bluff my way through the whole process, maybe my book wouldn't be published. And I would be telling you a completely different story. But thanks to that, I was able to make a career of writing books about different subjects, such as raising your kids, being pregnant, writing and publishing, creative parenting, finding love again. I have another book called Success Diaries, which was written in one of the most unsuccessful times of my life. And as I said, most of my books are in Spanish and other languages that I don't speak. But that was because I had made a name for myself in Spain, the country where I was born, and that is where my readers were. So my message to aspiring writers of memoirs and nonfiction, fiction again is a whole other animal, is don't give up on yourself. It could take a ton of time, because it actually did take me all those years before I actually tried to publish my book to write it, because without all those notes, I would never have been able to write it in such a short time. Think outside the box. If I'd gone the traditional route of writing self-addressed stamped envelopes to, myself, to agents and all that, it might have taken a longer time. I don't know. That my story might have been very different. But think outside of the box and also be ready for rejection, because after that book, I did get a lot of rejection. Well, actually, with that book, I got rejection too. But only one publisher has to say yes. Remember that. Another thing I've learned later on is that then the publisher, if you're successful with one title, they might want to pigeonhole you into that kind of writing, which exactly is what happened to me. And I really, really wanted to get out of that they just wanted me to write about eating disorders, and I was like, well, I want to be the author who wrote a book on her bulimia experience, but really she writes, I write a lot of other stuff. I didn't want to be the bulimic who wrote a book. So through the years, of course, that comes with life and continuing and persevering and all that, that I've written a number of other books, and I'm working on my next one. And the next one is in English, and it is how to turn your defects or your flaws into virtues. Because when people tell me that you're so prolific and you're you do so many things. I mean, I do a lot of stuff. I manage my business. I write for other outlets, including NBC and ARP. And I do social media. I raise my kids. I practice yoga every single day. But the fact is, I do that because I have an addicted personality. And I explain all that in that book where I detail my eating disorder. And I think I also speak a little about that in my book, Reach. So if you want a little more inspiration, you can get my book, Reach, From Single Mom on Welfare to Digital Entrepreneur. You can get it on Kindle. And once in a while, I'm able to give it for free. So keep an eye out on that. And if you are wondering what you should write, but you want to be a writer and you want to put that book out there, think, what is the story I have that is begging to be told? That is the biggest question. So if you like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll keep you posted on other parts of writing and publishing, among other things.